So chapter 3 talks about equivalence and equivalence effect. Could you just sort of talk about those terms?
Equivalence in meaning looks at how meaning is transferred from a source text to a target text at different levels of word or idiom text level. So I look at the work of Roman Jakobson and Eugene Nida, who were crucial in developing these concepts. For Jakobson, anything was translatable,
Right.
except perhaps poetry, he said, because the form was so mixed with the meaning there. But that's a point which I agree with. Anything is potentially translatable from one language to another. I think any translator approaching a text must approach it with that concept in mind.
Okay.
It's a question of then how do you translate, but equivalence is, there is a potential equivalence in the target language.
Right.
Nida was very important because he brought in the concept of the audience. So for him, he was training translators to translate the Bible into very many different languages, including African and South American languages that often didn't have a written form or not a developed written form. His goal there for translation was to create a text that would have the same effect on the audience as the source text had on its source text audience. And this meant going for what he called often dynamic equivalence. So dynamic equivalence would be trying to find a wording that was going to have the same effect and was very natural wording. There was another kind of equivalence which he talked about, which was formal equivalence. And that was retaining more of the source text features and syntax. But of course, the whole concept of equivalent effect has been criticised and can be challenged. How do you have the same effect on a modern audience on a modern audience compared to an audience from 2,000 years ago and in a very different social historical context? He gave an example which was hugely criticised of translate a greeting, a kiss, as to give a hearty handshake all around, which he felt was a modern American equivalent of giving a kiss in biblical terms. So you can see how there are problems there in determining the exact form of equivalence.
Right.
Yes, I end the chapter looking at Werner Kohler, who looks at different types of equivalence and sets up a kind of hierarchy of equivalence. So if one type doesn't work, then you move on to the next. And he looks, for example, at denotative equivalence and connotative equivalence, and then pragmatic equivalence. So some of these concepts are important to know. The difference between denotation, which is the dictionary definition, if you like, of a word, and the connotations which it conjures up, and then the pragmatic use, the way it's actually used in communication. So that's an important point to take from the chapter.